brief. Thank you. We have a brief introduction outlining the Rumble format. Then we will summarize the pros and cons of our topic today, which is personas. We'll send you all into breakout sessions for 15 minutes to discuss and share with each other. Then everybody comes back to the mothership to discuss as a whole group. And finally, we'll have some networking at the end for those who are interested. So what is a Rumble? For those of you who have not been to our last research Rumble, I want to briefly introduce the intention behind the Rumble format. So we are pulling from the popular researcher and author Brene Brown's definition of a Rumble. The intent here today is to facilitate a community discussion around sometimes controversial ideas in UX research. So the idea here is to lean into vulnerability, stay curious, be respectful to one another, of course, and most importantly, make sure that you're listening with the intensity that you'd like to be heard. Try on other people's perspectives, leave with the one you like best. And finally, just a reminder that you are the owner of your experience. So it's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, I am here to listen rather than participate today. We invite you to turn on your camera because this is meant to be a participatory discussion, but you can certainly leave it off if that makes you feel more comfortable. And of course, at any time, if you aren't liking what's happening and don't want to be a part of it anymore, you're free to go. The benefits of a Zoom call. Today's topic, like I said, is personas. Often considered a hallmark UX research deliverable, but with many vocal and potentially growing critics of the practice. So I'm going to turn the time over to Jess to summarize the pros of personas. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. So I'm going to be really honest with you all before I get started. I am on the con side of personas, and I took the pro side on purpose to challenge myself to see if I could find some things to like about personas or to support about personas. It's really difficult to go into a group of people and say, this is a bad way of doing things when they've been doing it for 20 years, right? So I wanted to sort of see if I could find a way to come alongside personas and find some useful things. I think personas distill research really well. Having worked with dev teams and design teams, those folks are very visual and sort of big picture thinkers, and it's really hard for them to sit through a deep research presentation with lots of data and details. So seeing a one-page, one-slide person with a couple of really key points helps them focus and understand what you're trying to say from the research without getting too down in the weeds, right? That's our job as the researchers. The personas distill really nicely for people who are going to consume the research. They also provide focus. Alan Cooper actually invented personas back in 1998, and he coined the term the elastic user. I'm pretty sure all of you have felt this, where a client imagines what the user might want or who the user might be. And then the team sort of starts to do the same thing, where we're extrapolating what we think the user is. And then we see scope creep and we see our backlog getting bigger, and all of the project starts to turn into what we want it to be instead of who the actual user is. So personas are a way to sort of narrow our focus and keep us looking at real people instead of these imaginary people that we're inclined to make up. Another thing that I have seen personas do is build alignment, especially with clients who often are not in touch with their users, right? You talk to clients and you hear a lot of, I think, I feel, we believe. And so personas based on research help bring clients into alignment with what we're trying to build for them. They also help design teams and other teams who aren't really in touch with the research to also join the alignment, right? So that we're all pointing the same direction through the decision-making process and keep returning to these artifacts. I like this one too. Personas prevent self-referential design. That's where we say things like, if I were using this app, I would really like for it to do this. Or if I were this user, or my dad is an engineer, he'd probably think of this, where we're sort of referencing our known experience and we're not actually including experiences outside of ours or outside of our close group of friends. So again, when we do research, we should be theoretically looking at a spectrum of audiences and users, and the personas will represent that spectrum, and they help break us outside of just what I think a user might do or what my dad's example of a user would do. And I think most importantly, personas build empathy. They are, again, thinking through those groups that we talked about of developers, designers, clients, account people, QA, all these people are really removed from the work that we do as user researchers, where we're doing qualitative interviews, we're sitting with users, we're understanding their wants and needs and feelings. It's hard to translate that back to these removed groups. So personas are a really great tool for building empathy and bringing those people in and helping them lean in a little bit more, see the users as humans instead of just users. I'm not a huge fan of the word users. So I think the persona really does a good job of putting a human face and a human emotional context around the projects that we're working on.
Well said. Well summarized.
Let's hear your side, Danielle.
Yeah, let's go for it. All right. So although I also have a nuanced view, I'm summarizing the cons here. And I want to start off with this gem. How many of us have seen this in some form or another at one point in the past 10 years? Am I right? A very rampant, a very good meme that summarizes one of the many challenges of personas. And I've seen this posted for years, but just saw it on my feed again as late as last week. So still very topical, I think. So since like 2017, 2018, I've been seeing everything from what I'd say like gentle questioning as to the value of personas and all the way to maybe belligerent, very passionate feelings on personas. I think the latter is probably summarized well by this talk title from UXPA last month. Yes, there are some folks who feel very strongly against personas. So let's review the arguments that may be driving some of this. The most common argument that I hear is just that there's a flawed execution, right? So I think we can all agree that demographic data, for example, doesn't really tell us much about how to make product decisions, not very predictive of behavior. That's the Aussie and King Charles example. But whether it's including the wrong factors, such as demographic data, or irrelevant factors, a peeve of mine being personality types in a persona, I don't like to see those. Maybe you have too many personas for them to be useful, very common thing. Maybe the personas are based on too little or no data at all. I think something many of us have experienced firsthand. So sometimes I feel like maybe folks deliver personas to check the storytelling box in research without really moving through and doing the work to convey the human stories that rolled up into that deliverable. But classic qualitative data problems, right? Another red flag with personas for me is that they do encourage extrapolating beyond the data behind them. And usually that's based on stereotypes. Sometimes I am appalled at the confidence of stakeholders when they do this extrapolation. Did we just assume that the mother of 5 who is preparing a family's meal is a homemaker, or did we actually ask that question? So that extrapolation and stereotyping into data beyond what we actually have, often with such confidence, right? Along those lines, personas, they provide us this mental shortcut, right? Which is often a value. But that can be a downfall, I think, as much as a benefit. So we know that it's difficult to get folks to read and reference research materials, right? When I deliver personas and then later I say, we're building this widget for technical Taylor, do you and I actually have the same shared definition of Taylor? Or have our memories of the data sort of frayed at the edges and warped over time? And are we just now very confident in what are assumptions? So I've seen that happen a few times by really well-intentioned groups. Okay, so execution and socialization challenges aside, let's just imagine that you do have a decent amount of data, a representative sample behind your persona. I've seen a lot of cases where folks will take the average or the most prevalent survey response and take those insights and smush them together into a depiction of a human. And the problem with that is that the average, when you take all those averages across those survey responses, across those survey items, that average person doesn't actually exist. Or the most prevalent factors smushed together into a human, that human doesn't actually exist. So I see that happen oftentimes, and you'll see personas that have some conflicting items that don't seem to align, and it's because that may have been the practice behind putting together that artifact. Okay, so there's that one. Let's imagine that you did your meaningful cluster analysis and you identified all the factors that actually hang together in the data. And okay, here's your snapshot of your user. At that point, I often find it's like a strategic pitfall. So I've seen teams will build for that user exclusively, and there's no thought about who the ideal user is, or who the served users should be based on company mission, company values. So I guess with that, personas naturally exclude groups by nature. That's what we're delivering, is a way to exclude, a way to prioritize. But I've seen teams where they'll actually exclude their target market in favor of a user persona based on their current market. So the business isn't making those strategic choices into new markets, into ideal users. And I've seen a good kind of rebuttal to this of anti-personas. If anyone's seen like an anti-persona, so this is summarizing who you're not targeting rather than who you're targeting. So I've seen that as a really great step in the right direction for solving that problem. But overall, it makes me wonder whether the cons kind of outweigh the benefits when using this type of artifact. So that summarizes the cons as I see them. And before I send you all into breakout rooms to elevate, continue on this conversation, share, I want you to consider this fact as well. So the UXPA salary survey is a great thing. If you don't know about it, you should go look at it. But last year, the UXPA salary survey came out, and Measuring You always does some summaries and things around it. And in their summary last year, 68% of respondents, we had a sample size of 625 from multiple countries, 68% of respondents say they use personas. So although we're seeing, I see a lot of criticism, public criticism sometimes, but by and large, we're all using these things. So I think that's just another thing I'd love for you all to be thinking about is I think we share some experiences using personas. So maybe you can pull that into your discussion as well. Okay, so let's get to it. We're going to put you in groups of about 4 to 5. Jess, did you have any clarifying?
Sure. We're going to go for, I forget, Danielle's at 10 or 15 minutes.
15. Yep. And I'll set a timer and just ping everybody when we're running out of time.
Yeah. So we'll have plenty of time to chat. Take a few seconds to introduce yourself. But we would recommend skipping the introductions, the long ones, and save them for the networking at the end. And if you wouldn't mind, if one person in your group would volunteer to be the scribe, if you've been here before, you know that we use a spreadsheet with your group number to take notes. So if someone would volunteer to be the scribe, and then afterwards we'll come back together and have folks popcorn in from their different groups, sort of what the theme was that you all discussed, or sort of where you all landed as a group.
Yeah. I'm dropping in the chat that notes page for groups to take notes.
Perfect.
Great. Off you go, and we'll see you in the breakout rooms. Welcome back, folks.
Yes, we come in muted. Good to be back, Danielle.
Great.
I'm here too.
Oh, there you are, Jess. Oh, so let's see each other. Danielle, I say let's see each other for our discussion versus a slide. What do you think?
Oh, yes. Let me do that.
Okay, beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's take the next couple minutes and maybe popcorn. And if you were the scribe and are willing to summarize for your group, or if you felt very strongly and differently from your group, let's do 2 minutes each. And you know what, this time we're going to roll through the groups. I'm just going to start with group 1. So if you remember who was in that group, what was your sort of general takeaway here? What did you all talk about, and what was the theme on your group? Does anybody remember? Oh, someone's nominating Strat. I know Strat. Where are you?
I am here. That may be because I talked the most. So we had a pretty cool little group. There were 4 of us in there, Booker, Jan, and G. We had a good representation of like corporate, new to the industry, and I'm going to just also preface with nonprofit area. I think that's important because one of the things that I talked about was how personas, we have to remember, are a tool. The tool can vary based on where you're at. Like, so that can be many different things: the industry you're in, the like level that you're starting in, and then also remembering that those tools exist in other areas too outside of research. So we talked / maybe I talked a lot about how market research has used these types of things for a long time. So you have market insights, you have other types of designers, again, using them to tell stories around what they're trying to build. And it's used as a representative piece to build a better story. But I'm not so like, I probably didn't get to the point that I'm not a huge fan of personas necessarily, except for in the right context. And I think defining that context is important. It's not a one size fits all tool to use. I equated that to a saw rather than Maslow's hammer. You can have a hand saw, you can have a circular saw, then you can get super specialized and have table saws, panel saws, and I could name probably 40 or 50 other saws because I also have a background in carpentry. You have to know when to use them, why you should use them, and who should be using them, because not everybody should be using some of those tools. I also briefly discussed how, if there are any nerds in the room, D&D character sheets could be a good example for personas, because the constraints around them are this: everybody has the same character sheet. Depending on your job, depending on the role, depending on the jobs to be done, you've got a backstory and you have character limitations of what types of traits you can set for each one of those things. That, if you've never played those games, I encourage you to maybe not play, but go try and set up a character from a character sheet. It's really easy walkthrough, really easy to do. And it can give you some interesting data points for building a persona or a character. But anyway, that's it.
Awesome. I love D&D character sheets. I love everything D&D. That's great. So who was in group 2? I love that. I want to kind of go through the groups real quick and then see if we've.
I was in group 2, Jess. So we can quickly summarize for our group. Allison said, well, look, does it help you? Does the persona, the bottom line is it helping you? Is it more helpful than it is hurtful? She said, don't throw the baby out if you don't have something else. Francesca, who was on our group, said, it's a way to create empathy, for the product team, designers, developers, she said, what is there some other better way? But it's useful. And in her experience, it's been useful. It does help people empathize. In our group, we had Susan Shaw, who's working for Ford Motor. We said, do you use personas? She said, yes, we do. The buyer of a Ford F-150 truck is very different than the buyer of a Mustang. They help us. But then she said, at a second level, we try to expand our personas because it is possible that single mom not living in Texas does want to drive a truck. So we might have who we think is our target, but we try to expand them beyond that. Anyway, those were a few points from our room that I thought were noteworthy. Anyone else from our room can chime in if I missed something.
Yeah, feel free to. Okay, and if not, who was in group 3? We got any volunteers from group 3?
Group 3 was actually empty, so we can move along to group 4.
Great, group 4.
Yeah, so in our group I'm Sam, and we had Kathleen, Kate, and Rosanna. And I feel like a general summary of what we came away with after our discussion was that, and this aligns with some of the things that have already been said, is that it's clearly useful for some people, right? And it just needs to continue to be useful. And one just needs to adapt the persona or the concept of it, whatever we call it. Like in our company, we're calling it segments right now. Just need to adapt it to something that's useful, credible. And one important point that Katie brought up was that it just needs to be used at the right time and for the right reasons. So there's use cases for personas, and there's the risk of using it in other situations where it's not appropriate. And I brought up in the case of our company, we need to design personas, again, we call them segments, to be able to collaborate with our market research team, right? They're going out and they're finding total addressable market. We need to have consumer surveys with significant data that show that, like, yeah, these characteristics, these priorities, these pain points match up with this group that is actually statistically significant, fits within a mainstream user base, right? And we have a general sense of the jobs that they want to get done with our product, right? And so my approach with personas is like, I will incorporate anything into them that works, that will make it more credible, that will help me know, make it easier for designers to act on it, and to keep the company, the product designers, the product managers, the executives strategically, keep everyone aligned on, here are top priorities, here are the biggest pain points or use cases that we're solving for that appeal to a large mainstream user base. But another thing that I wanted to bring in, that I think Katie brought this up as well, is that there's a risk of not designing things for people with limited abilities if you're only focused on large groups and mainstream users. And maybe that can be accommodated in a good heuristic, that you set up for your tools. But yeah, that's a good point.
That's a great point. Let's go through the rest of the groups. I had a thought that I wanted to add that's very similar to that, Sam, and thank you. But I'm going to save it for the end. I want to hear what everybody else sort of talked through. So I was in group 5, and we had a really good discussion. We didn't actually get past the first question because we were still trying to decide, like, if we throw out personas, what do we replace them with, was a really good question. We see a lot of benefit for them being useful for long-term or aspirational use. Who is it that we want to be targeting? And can we build towards that sort of ideal customer, which is, that was a really interesting suggestion from Valerian that I actually hadn't thought of before, and is very exciting. I actually want to go explore that a little. But we also have to question constantly, where are we getting this data from? How old is it? How often are we updating or refreshing it? We often do things in companies because that's just how we've always done them. And so maybe personas as an artifact are something that we've done just because we've always done them this way. And we can be the ones to question that trend. We had another input that was just really thoughtful, that outside of the context of the user journey and the product mapping and all of the pieces of the project, a persona is sort of useless. So finding ways to like weave them into the story of the product and the story of the people as a whole is really thoughtful. So even if it's a paragraph that pulls in the user journey, what does this person's day look like from the minute they wake up to the minute they go to sleep? And where does our product come in? And what problems are we solving, right? Sort of expanding the user persona to be part of the customer journey or a snapshot from the customer journey. And then framing, sort of what you were saying there, Sam, about like context, when and how do we use them? Who's seeing them? What are we using them for? The artifact itself doesn't really matter as much as making it clear that we're trying to help teams understand the human on the other end of the experience. So no matter what it ends up looking like, the persona or archetype or whatever we're calling it or segment that we're describing really needs to be focused on who are we helping and how are we helping them get there. And that was sort of where we landed. So we didn't even say for or against, it was just a very broad exploration of the questions around this space. What about group 6?
Let's see, 6 was empty.
Right.
7.
So 7 was my group, and we had Philip, Kathy, and Matthew, and Armando there. I think we opened up the question generally just as a for or against, and 2 to 3 of us were kind of against them, but we kind of moved to maybe appreciating that they have a great use in the right context and with the right audience, as we went through. And what that means is that when you're making creative decisions, or you're in that place to make decisions on behalf of users or your design, that they have a lot of value, especially within creative teams. Potentially because we do them for other people in the business and other stakeholders, they can get lost a little bit, and they're a momentary glance, but because they're not involved in actually maybe the full life cycle design, they have less value. So as we move through the 4 of the personas, I think it's become a thing in the industry. It's hard to untrain yourself from using them, and even I know that with Hurtful, who I've been working with as on the core team, it's part of the assessment process. It's just ingrained into being a UX designer, and it is very easy to understand and comprehend. But again, as we've already discussed, it's also very easy to get a big idea about something with very little data, a very little impact on, which can lead you down false paths. But if you're a creative, you're designing something, then you are constantly questioning that persona, constantly getting answers, constantly sort of refining it to a certain degree. So it has a lot of value with people in designing and making things, for sure. And they do build an element of empathy. It's really funny. I actually have developers now saying to me, "Oh, users would like this," and I say, "What users?" Okay, and they're already predefining it without any data, any information, anything to validate that statement, but they love to kind of tell me that that's what people want. And it again, as I said, is they often get pushed to the side. We do a lot of work around them, and then they get forgotten down the line. But as we've already commented on, if they're used in other aspects of research, journey maps and various, they have a lot of value. So I think we came out sort of, as you might say, mostly for them in the right context, with the right audience, and they're very valuable to creatives, designers, people making decisions on behalf of users and a product. Okay, and ensuring that they're actually building or designing the right thing. Does anyone else on the team have any comments or feedback on that? Great.
Awesome. Great. Danielle, did we have a group 8? Did we go?
We did. Yep.
Okay. Keep going. Who's group 8?
I can hop in here. So we kind of talked about our experience really with personas. Mine is more of that marketing angle of them, and I've done probably like 20 sets by now of building out personas. And ours really is, my process is through data heavy. We ingest our clients' data and match it with Experian data to really get out that, like, we know who we're targeting, like down to those actual people, and then just throwing it against a lot of psychographics to really drive that data. Sam said, like, we make sure it's statistically significant. So I know like these data points based off after analyzing all the lines of like the psychographics, consumption habits. So how we know the how, the what, where to target, what they prefer, really those heavy data points. But Jen, she had to hop off, mention like the why. Sometimes I'll agree with that. It's like, okay, yeah, they watch TV, but why? And I think there's a way to get at it, but it's just taking data. And sometimes what we've learned is we've ran the campaign based on these audiences, and the why kind of shows up a little later. Why aren't they responding to this messaging or this advertising or this user preference? And that kind of, to me, answers your why, because it's probably the content or how we're speaking to them or reaching them. Versus, yeah, they may like TV, but maybe they don't like prime time or daytime, etc. So I think that's the hard part about personas. It can really drive, and in agency life, it really does give creatives, I know, an idea of who they're talking to. So it really helps them. And then sometimes I know I work with a lot of media vendors, and it will help them just having this like high level kind of aspect of who they are, because sometimes they can reach that specific audience in a different way than we can. So to me, it's like this blend of, they're great foundational, but just as you said, it's really mapping down to that experience journey. I think can get more at why. So we know who they are, but why and how do they react at each phase of our journey?
Yeah, that's great. And why is so tricky, because every human has a different reason for what we do. So do we create a million personas, or do we try to mash them all up into one and hope that it works? Did we have a group 9? No. Group 10?
Nope, that's it.
None. Okay, I want to leave you with one thought that has stuck in my head for the last year. So Jared Spool talks about averages and extremes, right? We design a lot for averages, but when we're designing for averages, we eliminate the extremes. And what you get in the middle is homogeneous. We end up with personas, right? Personas are sort of these homogenized, amalgamated, we heard those words a lot today, pictures of people who don't really exist, and that they don't actually tell us anything interesting. So he recommends looking at the extremes and using those as your personas. And what we've found, for those of you who are talking about accessibility, when we design for extreme scenarios, we actually end up designing highly accessible products that then everyone is able to use. So I would challenge you, as we go away to the networking section, think about extremes. Think about how your personas could perhaps shift to a place where they get your team thinking about the most extreme scenario rather than the average, because we may be able to build better, more inclusive, more accessible, more everything products and marketing campaigns if we're working from the outsides in instead of the insides out.
Beautiful closing remarks, I think. Yeah. Raymond, do you want to kick off our networking? I do want to call to everyone's attention. We have that evaluation form. That link was just provided to you in the chat. And I think we will move into our networking session for those of you who'd like to do that.
Yeah, all I'd say is completely voluntary, but if you'd like to take time, we'll just have maybe 5 minutes. But if you want to break out, meet somebody, connect with someone, we'll create the opportunity now. If you log off, I just want to say thank you to Danielle and Jess for another awesome Rumble.
Well, thank you to everyone who came. This was such a great group. We got so much good feedback and interaction already. Thank you.
No, good point. Good point. Thank you all for coming.